get the live stream and okay. So we are going now. So I'll just start by saying good evening, everybody, and welcome to the December 15th meeting of the Rural Advisory Committee. I'm Derek O'Shea, the committee clerk. As this is our first meeting, I'll just do a quick introduction of who's in attendance, and then I will do the election of officers. So from the committee, we do have quorum tonight. Currently not in the meeting are Cameron Gunn and John Wernham. I hope they will be along tonight. They did not send regrets. From staff, we have quite a few members with us. My apologies if I get titles wrong, but I'll try my best. We have Kevin Gibbs, who I believe is the manager of Heritage Services, Tracy Snow, who is the Rural Economic Development Manager, Laura Flaherty, the, I believe, Manager of Project Planning. Again, my apologies, Laura, if I got that wrong. We have James Barr, the Manager of Development Approvals, Jennifer Campbell, the Director of Heritage Services, Janet James, the Deputy City Clerk, Kyle Bolton, Operations Manager with Public Works. I have a few versions of Luke Falwell in the meeting, but I know one of them is Anthony Simmons, who is the Manager of Construction Services. People were clearly sharing invitations. That's okay. We'll get that sorted out. I believe we do also have Luke Falwell, who is the Director of Engineering Services as well. And we do have 5 members of the public in attendance. And with that, I will call for an election of officers. So we did have that discussion previously that our current chair, Jose, is going to be ceding the position for the term. Is anybody interested at this time in making a nomination or volunteering as chair? I know this is, oh, go ahead, Councillor Oosterhoff.
Well, just to be clear, Mr. Clark, Derek, sorry, our clerk. So you said that we could wait, or do we come up with people who volunteer, or do we could wait for all the elections then until for 1 month?
What I can recommend to the committee, if you're willing to consent, is we can keep Jose as the chair and Councillor Oosterhoff as the vice chair for this meeting, and allow at a future meeting of the committee, the next one coming up in 2022, to do the election of officers then, so people have a chance to think about if they want to serve as chair or vice chair. So with that, is there any opposition to that plan? I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads. So in that case, what we'll do, the committee will consent to delaying the election of officers till the next meeting in 2022. And with that, I will turn things over to our current chair for this meeting, Jose. Madam Chair.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We will call the meeting to order at 6:03. And so we can get started with the approval of the agenda. The agenda as it currently stands. I know that there's a notice to motion by John, Mr. Wernham, and he's not in attendance. So just a question, Derek, does that change the notice of motion if it's not presented directly by John himself?
So, Madam Chair, so it is, he presented the notice of motion at the previous meeting, so it is on as a full motion. The fact that he's not here yet does not impact it. Also, Ms. Shannon, who's the seconder, is here, so there's still the potential for discussion, debate, and voting on that. So we can proceed as normal with the agenda.
Wonderful. So knowing this information, can I have someone to move the motion to approve the agenda? Allison, thank you. And a seconder, I think I saw Charlie's hand. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes.
Madam Chair, just quickly, we can get a vote, a show of hands to approve.
Perfect. All those in favor, show your hand. All in favors. Perfect. We can move on to now the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Can we have someone to pass the motion that the minutes of the Rural Advisory Committee meeting held Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021 be approved? Councillor Oosterhoff, can we have someone to second that? Councillor Bowen, all those in favor, please show your hand. All in favors, and we can pass on to number 5, disclosure of pecuniary interest. We have none. Delegations, we have none. We have 2 briefings today. So my understanding, and there again, Derek, please jump in to clarify. My understanding is that we will go through the presentations at the briefings. The committee members will have opportunities to ask questions after the briefing, and then we will reintroduce those topics in the business items to allow members of the public to also ask questions at that time.
So now, not to complicate matters, Madam Chair, but since we do have two briefings and with the reports, what I might suggest is we can sort of not skip the briefing section, but consider the briefings at the same time as the report. So we would go into the business item, cultural services could give their briefing, committee questions, and then public, and then we can go through that just to be able to have the business dealt with all at once for people respectful of their time this evening, if that's okay by you.
Thank you. I much prefer that. So thank you for allowing a more streamlined approach to the meeting. So we will move right away into the culture programming in rural areas of Kingston 2021 and 2022. I believe that is presented by Ms. Jennifer Campbell. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to invite Kevin Gibbs as well to come on to the call. So we're really happy to be here tonight. I think members of the Rural Advisory Committee will remember we were here in March of 2021. And at that time, we were laying out some plans to provide some additional programming opportunities into rural areas of Kingston. So we're here tonight to provide a bit of an update on what was able to be accomplished over the last year. We continue to be responding to the pandemic and all of the impacts. And gosh, I really hoped we were going to be here today, not facing what we are facing kind of locally and thinking to 2022, but we're going to continue to bring our optimism and our enthusiasm for the rural programming extensions to the table tonight. I'm happy to be here. And if I can I have the next slide, please? Awesome, thank you. So you'll remember that one of the initiatives that we've been discussing for some time was that it comes out of the Kingston Culture Plan, this community feedback and targeted direction around developing plans to deliver arts and heritage education and programming into the rural reaches of Kingston. And we started this in 2020 and COVID, but here we are. And I feel we are inching forward. And we've had some good first steps, I think, over the last summer that we're excited to share. Next slide, please. The other part that I wanted to share with the committee before I'm actually going to turn this over to one of my colleagues, Kevin Gibbs, is a change since the last time we were with the Rural Advisory Committee. And that change comes from the creation of a new department at the city with an alignment of services around specifically heritage. And that resulting change has also caused or renamed the department I used to be a part of, which was Cultural Services, into Arts and Culture Services. So what previously was coming from as a report from Culture is now coming as a report tonight delivered by Heritage. But I do want to emphasize that we're working in strong partnership with Colin Wigington, the Director of Arts and Culture Services, and his team, because we certainly share and appreciate the overlap on the kinds of programs we're trying to develop and deliver into rural Kingston. So we both departments did contribute to the programming that happened over the course of summer 2021. And we are very much in conversation about how we can continue to support the growth of rural programming into 22 and beyond. So with that, I'm actually going to invite Kevin Gibbs to finish the remainder of the presentation this evening. Kevin has joined us just a few months back, actually. He is the manager of Heritage Programming, and he now works very closely with our programming team to deliver the programming that we have been delivering in the rural area. So with that, I'm going to say next slide and invite Kevin.
Thank you very much for that, Jen, and I'm delighted to be here this evening. As Jen already mentioned, in 2020 and 2021, there were some, of course, significant impacts to programming as a result of the COVID pandemic. In 2020, for the most part, things were delayed and then eventually canceled. In 2021, we were able to do some rural programming, but with modifications to account for safety precautions and flexibility in terms of public health directions that we may have been faced with. So in the summer of 2021, there were two programming opportunities developed for rural residents in Kingston. One was provided as an outdoor opportunity, and the other one was provided as an online opportunity. And I'll talk about both of those today. So next slide, please. So the first is an outdoor opportunity that's been offered for some time, and this is Campfire songs that allows local performing artists to come and play music around a campfire. And typically in the past, these were held at the McLaughlin Woodworking Museum. In 2021, we switched locations to Hemlock Downs Park in Glen Burnie, and we did this for a couple of reasons. One, to provide programming opportunities for residents living north of Highway 401. And the other reason was to test the suitability of another location for these campfire songs. And this is in anticipation of a new sort of model looking forward for campfire songs, which could include other sorts of locations in a rotating site model. So we would move campfire songs to different locations over the course of the summer. So this served as a useful test for that. But otherwise, the objectives of campfire songs remain the same in 2021 and would remain the same looking forward. Next slide, please. So in the summer of 2021, there were 2 campfire songs events, both in Glen Burnie, and the first was on August 12th, led by Roger James, a singer, musician, and comedian as well. And you can see in the image on the right, some socially distanced enjoyment of his music. Next slide, please. And on August 26th, we had Gary Raspberry, who was also performing music and singing, and people were singing along. And you can see in the slide on the right, again, socially distanced enjoyment of that event. Next slide, please. So just as a little bit of general feedback on these events, there were about 35 people in attendance at each one, though there was some sort of repeat customers. People enjoyed the first one, so they came back for the second one. And if you may have noticed from the previous slide, there were all age groups included, from infants and young children up to seniors. And in general, there was quite a lot of appreciation and enjoyment of the event and appreciation for holding a local event. That was some of the feedback we received. In terms of looking forward to future years, there were some good recommendations by people in attendance, including finding a location with washroom facilities, and perhaps in a post-pandemic world, food options as well. And in terms of event promotion, we did have some good promotion in advance of the events. And Alex McLean, who was one of the programming coordinators who was putting this together, was interviewed on Global News, I believe, and it featured in some other venues as well. But we realized that there are also opportunities for these events themselves to be promotion events. So someone could come to one of the campfire songs and learn about other sorts of events. So next slide, please. So the second programming event that I'll talk about was an online event, and this is one that was put together by Arts and Culture Services, and it's the Digital Community Arts Series, which provides accessible arts programming to long-term care homes and agencies supporting community members with cognitive and physical disabilities. In the past, this series was held as an in-person series of events, but in 2021, this was transitioned into an online event. And the silver lining to this was that it was able to be offered to a new rural partner, a community partner, and that's Fairmount Home in Glen Burnie. Next slide, please. So over the course of 6 weeks, 6 different artists, including musicians, dance, and poets, provided unique 30-minute programs developed specifically for community members. And on this slide in the upper right and on the previous slide, you can see some images taken from those online events. And some of the musicians that were included there. And on the lower right, you can see some of the 2 of the summer arts program assistants that helped put this series together. And the response to these events were very positive as well. And on the bottom, you can see a quote from one of the recreations at Fairmount Home. Everyone was enjoying the event, and thanks again for the project. So next slide, please. So just to sum up, this image was shown at a previous meeting. Except the difference now is that our little green dot has bumped from the top down to the bottom. So now we're in the final stage of program assessment, reporting, and future planning for the 2021 event and future planning for the 2022 event, rather. And some of the things that we're thinking about, if we can move to the next slide, are other sorts of programming opportunities for rural residents of Kingston, but also logistical suggestions around specific locations where things like campfire songs could be held. So other parks, other community gathering spaces, etc. But also suggestions for partnership opportunities with local community organizations and associations. So people who could deliver programming content, but who could also consume it. So people who may be interested in enjoying and participating in the sorts of programming opportunities that could be provided. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to open the floor for questions to members of the committee. Also knowing that you threw questions our way in terms of ideas and suggestions of locations. So I want to invite members of the committee to pitch in if they have any ideas on that front as well. Yes, Councillor Straw.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kevin and Jennifer, for your presentations. Excellent. I don't want to go, I'm only going to go first, I'll say, to the committee so others can think of a few ideas too, but I can't help myself. I really, I wish I could say I took the some of the events in this summer, but I don't think they coordinated with me, but I did hear about them, and I really want to commend everyone for making them happen. And I'm hopeful that it is something that we can try again, and even in a COVID era. I know it's a challenge for everything, but I sure hope that we can give it some inspirational ideas. And I was just going to say, Kevin, that we do have a couple of campgrounds in our area too with washroom facilities. I know the management and staff would be welcome. That's an idea for you, because I know that washrooms are important. But, you know, we also have a couple of fire halls, perhaps, you know, something like that, that 3 fire halls or 4 fire halls, you know, where we could do that. And the grounds are reasonably large. So, and they also are a point of gathering too. So, but lots of little ideas. I look forward to talking to you, Kevin, about that elsewhere. But maybe if you could give us till the next rural advisory an idea for the clerk to maybe say, fire it out there. We really do value what you're doing. And I think that it's a great initiative to advance culture and arts in the rural area, which really has something to offer. And so I just want to thank you for that, but would love to be part of, I think Rural Advisor would love to be part of the solution for you too, and inspiration for it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ustroff. I think from my perspective in the past, we've received a few briefings with respect to the food venture and some of the programs in regards to food tourism specifically. So I wonder if that is, if there's any possibilities of alignment to some regard to encourage our farmers and to align the culture and arts programming with that food venture programming. But I see, Jennifer, you have your hands up. So I think I'm touching on a point on a sensitive chord here.
Oh, thank you, and through you, Joe. You correctly remember, and I'm just speaking to it because I know Kevin's been with the city only less than 6 months, so he may not have as much insight in that coordination discussion with Tourism Kingston and the food initiative. You know, we were very excited. Previously, when we came to Rural Advisory Committee, we had been looking into, you know, the fair partnerships, the opportunity to think about the farm to table kinds of concepts, and the way that TK and others were sort of starting to think about packaging that. And we've not lost sight of that, certainly. I think what we've been able to do this last year is really demonstrate that what we already knew in our sort of anticipation and hearts to be true, which is that there is appetite for programming, obviously, in the rural areas of Kingston. And I would also just add to that I think one thing we did learn this summer that I think we can bring to those discussions with the farms and the food and the fall fairs and other fairs in the summer is there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm. We were on CBC radio actually talking about this. They reached out to us. Why are you campfires? This is exciting. And, I think what we took away from that is something this committee has reflected back to us, which is the rural program experience is not the downtown program experience moved elsewhere. And we knew that to be true. And I think we're continuing to see that. And so we're very excited to get back into those discussions we've had previously, but also to really amplify what we learned about rural experiences. And they are different. And it actually is something to be celebrated and a reason to continue the work that we're doing. So it's a long-winded way of saying we're very excited about those food partnerships to come. Very excited. I know Allison had previously connected us as well. So thank you guys for that. And looking forward to bringing back new ideas in March, probably at one of your meetings to again do kind of the plan for 22 and regroup.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. I I think in terms of ideas, you and your team, I'm sure, are working so hard and diligently at finding ideas that are COVID compliant, that are safe and secure for everyone, but are also interesting in terms of that rural perspective and paradigm that you're operating with, which we 100% support and appreciate. I think that as a result of COVID, you might have incurred delays, which might have, mean that some part of your budget remained unused, or you might have, incurred additional costs because of the consequences of COVID. So not questioning budget management or what is left in your pocket or not, but, any ideas come at a cost. And I think, I don't know if there's any models of other municipalities on how they're managing that. But I did hear of some, potential little funding that communities or, small neighborhood and residential areas, even in the rural area, could apply for to essentially, have hot dogs on the street, close the street for a day and have hot dogs served on that one street. So I don't know if that type of application model is something that you can consider. Another thing that I think are always fun for children is kind of the corn maze. Well, we can't really expect farmers to do that out of their free will if they are having a hard crop year, et cetera. So, would funding be possible to encourage a farmer to build a corn maze or things like that? These are ideas that are potentially more rural, bringing people to the rural experience that might be COVID compliant as well. Another thing that I personally really, really, really enjoyed a few years ago was at I think it's the Jacques Cartier Park in Gatineau. They have the Mosaïque Culture landscape, like the flower display. Not that I think Kingston can beat Ottawa to this, but that can also be another experience in the summer where we could encourage farmers or individuals of interest to build that type of flower display that is very rural, that's very cultural, very artistic, but in a complete different essence than what we've seen in Kingston in the past couple of years. So just throwing these ideas your way. And then I'm looking at other members of the committee. I'll give a moment to reflect. Does anyone have anything to say, to add? Okay, I'm happy to open the floor to, oh yes, Jennifer, I saw did you have something to add?
Madam Chair, I believe I saw Ms. Shannon's hand was up.
Oh, perfect, thank you. Allison, the floor is yours.
Yeah, this great comments, everybody, and thanks for the reports and the good work on behalf of that committee. Something to consider if you're thinking about ideas as well is that the Canadian government last year declared that this year coming 2022 was to be the year of the garden. And certainly gardens are not exclusive to urban spaces, but you can, there's probably a little bit of synergy there. So I don't know if there's resources at different levels of government for that, but that might be sort of, there might be some momentum and some synergy, and perhaps other municipalities are thinking about focusing on that. Certainly, we're fortunate in the city of Kingston to have a fabulous parks and recreation department, greenhouse. I'm just, if there's something in the rural area. So that's just a theme to touch on. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent. 2022, the year of the garden. That's very interesting. Mr. Gibbs, please.
Yes, I just wanted to mention the City of Kingston Heritage Fund has a program for providing grants to programming opportunities. So there would be chances and opportunities for rural organizations to apply for those funds and would have a very good chance of being successful potentially.
Are the requirements only for residential associations, for example, or could members of the public apply for it for their community?
They're primarily for organizations to apply for these, but if there are rural organizations, but there's certainly some flexibility in terms of what could be a viable program that could be funded.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that. There are opportunities if we do partner with organizations in the rural areas. So There are flow-through organizations that have acted on behalf of individuals or smaller groups of individuals. So even though there are some fiscal accountability kind of requirements to receiving the grant, we have been able to partner with groups or individuals to secure a flow-through funder who can then receive and take on that fiscal component of the grant. And I think, the concept of compensation for corn mazes and the like, it's an area where the fund has not been used in the past, but it actually does align to the fund's initiatives. And I think, Kevin and I can certainly take this away, because I think thinking about how we can better advertise the availability of those funds. And just to put that in context for the committee members here, we brought a report to council at the last council meeting, and that report brought forward the realization that $90,000, I believe, was underspent in the fund. So it was undersubscribed in the area of community programs. We think that's largely to do with COVID. So groups and organizations are a little, reluctant to plan something when they don't know what that looks like. But over the last several years, the fund has been undersubscribed. So we are trying to find ways to get people to that fund to invigorate those opportunities for programming. So, what I'm taking away tonight is there may be an opportunity for some rural awareness and education around the fund to maybe connect some of these partners to the fund as a source.
Yeah, that is very useful to know, and perhaps a conversation that we can bring off record with the city staff with respect to curbside signs that in the past, the Rural Advisory benefited from, having a little bit of advertisement for meeting attendance, where we would use those curb sign pickup, and that was organized, I believe, with the communications department of the city of Kingston. So not promising anything, but it could be cool if we could, display the possibilities of what that could look like for rural citizens in those placements where we had the curbside pickup in the past. Because I think there could be a lot of interest from members of the rural area to participate in those things, mostly if it's a corn maze, or if it could be, they could share ideas that works for them for sure. So just putting that on the table as a potential future conversations in terms of sharing and communicating that to members of the public. Is there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? If I see none, I think we can turn to members of the public. I do see one hand that is raised. Derek, can we turn to members of the public at this time?
Yep. And before we allow Trevor to speak, I'll just let members of the public know if they do wish to speak, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. That's the button at the bottom. Then we will know you wish to speak. Also, people have up to 5 minutes to speak, and once all public comments are done, staff will respond to any questions. So I will now allow Trevor to unmute his microphone and speak.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So one of the thoughts I had around the resources, not the fiscal resources, but the human resources around the Campfire, is tapping into some of the organizations and volunteer groups that do music in the city, of which we have quite a few. And certainly, one of the ones I think of is some of the successful music in the school events that have gone on for a number of years. And that's been organized by Al Rankin. I'm not speaking for him here, but just as an idea. And also, we have the Live Wire music series that brings in out-of-town talent, but also makes use of talent in town. And so I think looking at just other resources about bringing other musicians or craftspeople to the table and having connections with that, I think might be helpful. So it's just an FYI.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. I apologize if you hear BB complaining a little bit. Sorry, he's in good hands. Thank you, Trevor. Really appreciate your input. I don't know, Jennifer and Kevin, if you have anything you would wish to add. Perfect. We can just wanted to have a look around the table for members of the committee if there's any comments, ideas, questions you wish to add before we close the subject and move on to the next business item. Seeing none, we will move to the next business item, which is the Public Works and Engineering update. I believe that is provided by Luke Fulwell. So I will leave you the floor. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, and thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's Luke Fulwell here, Director of Engineering Services, and I work with our colleagues in Public Works, Karen Santucci, who's the new Director of Public Works and Solid Waste, and Kyle Bolton, who is the Operations Manager, and also with us tonight, Anthony Simmons, our Manager of Construction Services. And I'm going to introduce Anthony to provide just a bit of an overview on the engineering projects. So Anthony, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Luke. I'd like to introduce the report RAC 22002 tonight, which is meant to update the group with some information about how Public Works and Engineering are managing and maintaining the right-of-way and parkland assets in the rural areas of the city. Included in this report, upcoming right-of-way maintenance initiatives, parkland improvements, and capital roadway projects. As part of the city's continued efforts to provide value for maintenance and capital funds spent, in this report, you will see several opportunities realized by strategizing the efforts of our Public Works group in advance of some of our planned capital work, specifically on the Brewers Mills Road and Edenwood Estates subdivision. Through this multi-departmental strategy and effective planning utilizing condition data for our roadways, the most recent collection, which happened in September of this year, included, we plan and implement the rehabilitation of more lane kilometers of roadway requiring fewer capital dollars year over year. So to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, in 2019, we were able to rehabilitate 17.6 lane kilometers of rural roadway, followed by 47.6 lane kilometers in 2020 and 34 lane kilometers in 2021. This volume represents over 50% of the total lane kilometers for roadways throughout the city. So in 2022, we have another robust program for rural rehabilitation, which will include the rehabilitation of another 37.6 lane kilometers in the rural community, along with 3 parkland improvements and 4 stormwater culvert replacements. And now I'd like to take the time to turn it over to one of my colleagues from Public Works in case they have any other comments that they would like to add.
I think we just wanted to add a little bit on to some of the regular programs that we have, some of the operational programs that we have that are used significantly by the rural areas as well. So our Clean Neighborhood program, which is a program where we hand out garbage bags and gloves and stuff to community groups who then do some cleanup on some of the roadsides or in the neighborhoods. And then we come back and we pick up that garbage for them. This program's used almost pretty close to 50% by the rural neighborhoods. The other area that we have is our neighborhood tree program, where last year we provided 1,000 trees to residents who would then plant them on their own private property. 25% of that, those trees went to the rural area as well. This year we're looking at 3,600 trees to be planted, and we expect again to see a good percentage of those. Sorry, my cat is all over me. Sorry about that. We expect a good percentage of those to go into the rural area as well.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Fulwell, to this briefing, or can we jump into committee questions and comments?
Madam Chair, no, I think that's it. That gives a high-level view. I don't, Kyle or Mr. Bolton, are you okay with that, or do you want to add anything?
The only thing I could add, Luke, to what Anthony said is that Public Works and Engineering are working together on those projects, and we're hoping to look at the drainage together, get out and do what we can as preventative maintenance or maintenance that's required in advance of their contracts, in addition to our regular maintenance like roadside mowing.
Thank you, Kyle. So, Madam Chair, yeah, that would be our overview of the report this evening, and we'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have your team at the Rural Advisory Committee meetings. We tend to have you guys just before the winter because we know how critical the road maintenance is in the rural area where a lot of people have to commute quite a large distance to go to work. So it's so critical. It truly is critical infrastructure for a lot of individuals. So there are a few questions. So I did promise Mr. Robert Wolf, who has been a member of the public, attending many of the Rural Advisory Committee meetings, that I would ask a question on his behalf and for the Rural Advisory Committee meeting that we had in the past. So since before March 2020, we've been interested in hearing about the rural boat launch solution. This has been a recurring topic that we've been interested in hearing a lot, about. So definitely no intention to come out as a surprise here. But I know that there was a lot of concerns with the Aragon Road boat launch that became unavailable, which led Colonel by Lake to be without a boat launch. So I believe those were concerns that were brought up, and we were promised that there was investigation of possibilities with Parks Canada to find a boat launch for Kingston at the Kingston Mills area. So anyways, just relaying the information that I've read recently with correspondences that dates from March 2020 and onward. So interested to know if you have a status update on that.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I don't have any additional or new information on the request through the federal government. I haven't seen anything recently on that, but what I can share with yourself and the committee and the members of the public, that as part of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that was endorsed by Council earlier this year, they did advance in the Parks and Rec Master Plan two rural water access locations. One was in Cecil Wilma Graham Park, and that is in the short-term capital budget currently earmarked for 2024. And in 2026, reviewing water access at Lowboro Lake. So originally, those were part of a broader strategy in the Waterfront Master Plan and planned to take place in 2036, I believe, was original. So they were advanced as part of the Parks and Rec Master Plan in the next 4-year capital budget for consideration of Council.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the update and for precising this information because it's definitely been something that has been brought up many times at the Rural Advisory Committee. And I foresee the possibility of this recurring in the new work plan and in the new year in 2022. So you'll hear more from us, I believe, on this regard. Councillor Bowen?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. I just wanted to follow up on a quick comment as far as boat launches. Councillor Oosterhoff and I, it's going back almost a year and a half now, I think, had some discussions around the possibility of speaking with Rideau Acres or other private launches and trying to include or subsidize or have city access provided at those things through some sort of an agreement. So I'm not sure where that all went, whether anything's been developed there, but it would be nice to maybe get that back on the table as well, because there are some woefully underutilized ramps right now that are well maintained, which could help, I guess, bridge the public until we have some of our own launches re-added and possibly continue with fruitful partnerships in the future as well. So just something to kind of put out. I'm not sure if staff has the ability to comment on whether any of those talks are ongoing, or is this something that we kind of need to pick up again?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Staff have not initiated any additional conversations with the private operators. When requested from residents or other members coming through town, we do provide those private operators. They are pay-as-you-go options, but beyond that, staff have not initiated any further conversation.
Maybe Councillor Oosterhoff can help jog my memory here. I'm trying to remember exactly when that came about. I guess my next question would be, what would it take then to initiate those? Would it require a motion of council, or is this something that like the committee can make a recommendation on? I know we typically don't actually make recommendations on items unless it's already on the agenda before us. I'm just trying to think of how we could possibly pursue this a little bit further and what it would require for staff to do
that. Through you to the councillor, I guess a question as to what, it's not clear to me as to what specifically council or committee are asking of staff. There are boat launches available at the current time. Are you asking if the city would subsidize those launches for the pay-as-you-go customer? There would need to be an agreement, or there need to be some sort of certainly process in play in order to facilitate that. So I'm not sure that would be the engineering department that would initiate that process. We'd have to probably talk to our partners in Rec and Leisure to help facilitate that, who manage the city pay-as-you-go launches. So
I guess just to add a bit more clarity and context around that, that's kind of my question is, what do we need to do, whether as council or as a committee, to pick that up in the sense, because I mean, we're losing boat launches far quicker than we're adding them. So, I mean, there are, I use Rideau Acres as an example because I can't remember which staff member we were speaking with, but it did come up in the meeting. And I believe it might've been in regards to one of the developments over here. And Councillor Ustinov and I mentioned, how few there are actually for the rural area, and we're losing them, not adding them. So what would it take to have those conversations and try to come up with a shared policy where, city residents could access those private launches, or we could better utilize those private launches through some sort of share lend-lease policy or something like that. So I don't know what the exact answer is. I just know that we had talked about it a year and a half ago, and then it seemed to go dormant. So perhaps Councillor Oosterhoff could add a bit more context as well.
Madam Chair, if I could just add, the boat launches at Rideau Acres are available to the general public. They are not restricted to their clients only.
No, I understand. It was more the cost prohibitive nature of it. I believe it's $20 a launch. So it was kind of, we're losing the public provided ones, and without sort of, a lot of people also are not aware of the different launches than the private ones, or whether they're actually allowed to use them. So just sort of food.
Thank you, Councillor Boehm. Councillor Oosterhoff, please.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Boehm, for that. I do know that maybe, Madam Chair, we can somehow initiate a side conversation on this, because I appreciate being part of Councillor Boehm's discussions in 2021 when we talked about another option for in the lower part of the river on the south side of Kingston Mills. And so the whole discussion of boat launch keeps coming up. It is important to me, but the city, I understand through Mr. Fallout and his team, it's dedicated to a certain time in budget. And I get that. There is some sense in the rural area, and I'd like to be able to talk to our rural economic strategy over time. There's a way that I'd like to see it get a little more attention, and that we get the facts and are clear on that. So it's probably not a good time tonight, but it is really important to me. It's important to the rural area. And I also think it's important to our rural economic plan and a better messaging perhaps. So I really appreciate it brought it up, but it's a file that we want to get at, but both Councillor Boehm and I just think that we need a separate time to deal with that and to gather information and data and really put it out there so that we all know where we are and where we're going. And so that's my suggestion right now.
Thank you, Councillor Oosterhoff. And I think that is indeed a theme and a topic of conversation that could deserve its own briefing, essentially, where staff can have more time looking and investigating into it rather than being added to tonight's conversation, which is a little bit unfair to Mr. Folwell's team here. But certainly it is of interest. We've had a lot of questions and inquiries and conversations and discussion about this. My understanding, and I could be wrong, is I understood that the current arrangement for the boat launch on the Colonel by Lake is a temporary solution, not necessarily a long-term one. So I think this opens up further conversation as well, because there's multiple layers to this. Councillor Oosterhoff, I saw your hand, so please jump in.
Yeah, no, thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I wanted to go back to thanking Luke and his team. It's really good to see Kyle and Anthony and even Karen. I'm not sure I've met you yet, Karen, in your new role. So I look forward to, I haven't hounded you yet as a rural councillor too often because I have these other guys' phone numbers. But I do look forward to working with you, Ms. Santucci. And I do want to thank everybody for the work done in 2021. And, you know, I really appreciate everyone's openness and availability through the year. We have lots of little crises moments of, you know, certainly flooding and drainage, and those are real things for us in the rural area. And so I certainly want to make that clear. And on behalf of Rural Advisory Committee, we're thankful for the work that's being done and the dedication to it, and all your teams. And I'm pleased. Just behind the scenes, I want the committee to know that I have worked with some of these and choices of roads. And I appreciate the involvement, and you know, a lot of work's gonna be done in Abbey Dawn Road, and Councillor Bohm knows that too. There's a lot of things that's been going on for wow, I think 5 years, and so you know, those are really good things. And I appreciate the attention to the roads that we've been bringing up over time. I'm sure Edenwood Estates is doing a happy dance right now when they see their name on there, and as well as the other roads that are there. And many people wait a long time for this. So thank you for an exciting year ahead for us. I do want to bring up something, Madam Chair, that a road that's not brought up, because I think it's important to put it out there as an issue that I would like everyone to know about, is the Highway 38 area. Highway 38 and 401. And I want it out there because I want it known that I experienced it. I know MTO has been involved. Immediately north of the 401, from the 401, the last set of lights, 250 meters to the north, there's a rapid merge to one lane. And we've seen a series of accidents there. And I don't know what it's going to take, Madam Chair, but for next meeting, we do a motion for more attention to this. I'm afraid someone's going to get killed there. And I know MTO as well, you know them, people on this, but no one seems to really want to accept responsibility to it. And I'd like to know if there's any more we can hear about it, because we have Harpel Road right there. I know it's an unusual design situation. We have 2 or 3 driveways there at the same time. And we have rapid merging, and we have Indianapolis 500 Raceway right there, because everybody's tired of waiting for all the lights on Gardner's Road. They're heading north. And the last set of lights is where you turn left onto the westbound 401, and they are literally racing to not be the next one to slow down. I think we have a serious situation, and I know that no one really wants to look at it, but we can't put our heads in the sand there. And I'm wondering, is anything at all being done with our conversations with MTO, and that we can ensure driver safety and our community safety in that area?
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm not directly involved with the conversations. I know our Director of Transportation, Ian Semple, has been in touch with MTO. It is part of the MTO corridor. So unfortunately, I don't have an update for committee tonight, unless anyone else on the call knows anything in addition to what I don't know. So I apologize for that, but we could certainly bring that information back.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. But it ends there. And the reason I'm bringing this up, and I want it in the minutes, is because MTO has said it's not theirs. It ends at a certain point, and we're in a stalemate. And so I think it's really important that we do a high-level conversation of what it takes. It's not lit properly, for one. And the rapid merge there is, you know, I'm no expert, but I'm just saying that the people are letting us know. And I think too often in the rural area, or wherever, we could be in the urban area too, we don't really seem to hear what the people are saying. And I think that it's time to turn up the urgency in that situation. And if that takes a motion, then I would do that. But I have I have been, it's probably the most urgent thing I can bring to Road Advisory, that we need to do something there, because people have been injured in the last 2 accidents there.
Thank you, Councillor Usharoff. I think this is an important point, and perhaps we can have offline conversations continuing on this trajectory to know who from the city would be the most appropriate to answer these questions and continue investigating this, providing status update onto this matter.
Yeah.
Knowing that it might not be a conversation for tonight,
Okay.
knowing that we may not have the sufficient information here, and knowing that there's a little bit of tension with whose responsibility.
Yeah, that's really the point. Who is?
Yeah, it would be great if we can continue this conversation and identify who might be able to speak to it from city staff. So Derek, I don't know if we can make, a little comment or a little side note, a footnote to the meeting notes to continue this conversation, to identify and then pursue this and on another meeting.
Thank you.
I do have it captured in the minutes, Madam Chair.
Perfect, wonderful. Thank you very much. I do have 2 points that looks a little bit more like a comment than a question, but I do want to see if there's any other member of the committee that would like to ask a question before I move in another direction here. I also just want to make sure if John, I know John has joined the conversation via telephone. Just want to test the connection. John, can you say a few words just so we can hear if it works?
Yes, Madam Chair. Although I've got quite a hoarse voice, and it so happens that I have COVID, so this forum is best.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad that you're able to join us, and I'm glad that we're able to hear you so you can participate in the conversation. But certainly all of my best thoughts.
Oh, I'm fine. I thought it was particularly important to be involved with this zoning bylaw briefing. Looking forward to hearing about that.
Perfect, wonderful. Well, we'll move on to that, but I have 2 more points to make on this briefing, and then I want to open the conversation to members of the public as well. So my perspective is going to be a little bit more one of the Eastview area, east side of Kingston. So I see 2 things. One thing is the Eastview pathway, page 3 of 5 of the report at the bottom with the Parks and Shoreline projects. I know Councillor Boehm has been brought up into a Facebook conversation of the Eastview group, where this came entirely as a surprise for that Red Avenue to Serpentine Lane. Members of the community were completely surprised by what was happening, and they were caught with their pants down because the project was happening and it was beginning as they were informed of it. So just I know concerns were addressed by the team, and I'm very grateful for the way they were addressed. But it opened up a question for me in regards to the consultation process in terms of these type of projects and these type of endeavors. So how are community members typically notified that this is coming up, ahead of, the poster that it's happening? And how long, what is the timeline so in terms of, consultation mechanism and project management type of stuff?
Through you, Madam Chair. So that particular project was approved in our Parks and Rec, or the Waterfront Master Plan, I apologize. And then regular updates to committee or council, not always committee, been provided. We provide council with an annual list of projects. So it would have been captured there as well at the high level. And certainly the Waterfront Master Plan went through rigorous engagement for a number of years. In terms of moving it forward, we've changed that a little bit as a result of the pandemic, in that we are starting to put, in some cases, signs up in parks because people are out more enjoying the public space, which is wonderful. And we're finding that level of engagement is improving at the local level, but we're also communicating through our Get Involved platform online. And we encourage everyone to sign up to the Get Involved platform, because you get information on all the projects that the city is leading, and you can provide input and engage that way, which is, and certainly we've held a number of Zoom public engagement sessions that have been very successful. So that would be the high level process.
Thank you. That's really appreciated. And I think, it's a little bit utopic that members of the public go online and read the minutes of council and that read the waterfront plan necessarily. And I think that's where it came as a surprise, because as members of the public and a member of the community, they were not notified personally that their community was affected by this project, a project that, a lot of resources went into, a lot of good money for a project that they didn't want ultimately. That they didn't see as needing. So it's an interesting endeavor, and it was an interesting project, which I hope that there's a lot of lessons learned from the team. I know that things were resolved very well by very competent staff that addressed those concerns and had very fruitful conversations with the community. So 100% grateful and appreciate that level of consultation that happened after concerns were raised. And certainly just wanted to affirm that this type of signs that you put up is extremely fruitful and beneficial if it can be put ahead of time and things like that. So members do have the opportunity to know what's happening with their community without having to go back to reading or listening to conversations of counselors or big plans of 50 pages or more that we can't see members of the public necessarily reading, at least in the rural area. So that was my first point. Oh, yes, please. You're welcome to respond to that.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Maybe just a few points of clarification. Staff do not have the ability to connect with every single resident in every single neighborhood. We will certainly do our best and strive to communicate, as I mentioned, with signs in the park, through our Get Involved platform, and new ways that will develop over time. So, we always try our best to do that. We also know that through our experience that improvements that we're making along the waterfront in particular, people are finding that private space that is really a public space is not as private anymore. And that will happen over time. Certainly along the waterfront, a lot of our city-owned land has been treated as private land, and not all residents of Kingston have been able to enjoy it. So that's a change that's going to happen, and that's endorsed through the Waterfront Master Plan specifically in terms of creating and providing access to the water. So I recognize certainly in the Eastview subdivision, a space that is very private. It's public land that was prioritized in the Waterfront Master Plan. So I'll end there.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of things that come with that, including safety and infrastructure, parking, et cetera. So an area like Eastview, for example, has a lot of limitations to this respect. But I think this conversation is pointing elsewhere, a little bit on a tangent conversation, which is about communications and correspondences with rural residents, which might look a little bit different than from the urban citizens. And those are conversations that Rural Advisory Committee has been trying to have and has been successfully having with the communications department. So we're working on many fronts here. So there was no intent to point fingers at your team specifically to this regard, but certainly, taking opportunity to learn from that situation where it was really unfortunate for such a lovely project to be undermined or to be misunderstood. So lesson learned and moving forward, but certainly it's the opportunity to write down those lessons learned and look at different ways that we can improve our communications with rural citizens on many fronts, not just for public works and engineering matters, but on many fronts as well. The other thing I wanted to identify was the Clean Neighborhood Program. So just wanted to give full recognition that this is an awesome initiative. I can see that being extremely useful and will share information. So if there's any information, Ms. Santucci, that you want to share with the Rural Advisory Committee, I'd be happy to promote and share because I believe that is a very good program that you have developed, and I can see a lot of benefits to that. All right, so just looking around, members of the committee, if there's any interest in asking further questions or comments before I move to members of the public. Okay, I do see a hand up from Mr. Trevor Worley. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I'm not sure Councillor Ustinov wants to see my happy dance, but I am in the Edenwood Estates, and we are pleased to see the progress being done on the roads. But also we've noticed a lot of activity relative to utilities, gas lines, bell lines being flagged out by a number of telecom companies over the last few weeks. And we're wondering is that tied to the road work that's planned on being done, or is that a separate initiative? Do we have any information on that? Once again, very pleased with the announcement about having looking at work being done even with states, and our thanks to Councillor Ustinov, who we've certainly have communicated with many times around this, and we certainly appreciate the attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Simmons, please. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Okay. So through you, yes, I'm going to speculate here because we are gathering some geotechnical information throughout the Edenwood Estates subdivision. So that would require, prior to them gathering that bore or creating those boreholes, to gather that data to get locates. So that's likely what you're seeing. That work will be underway in the next over the next couple of weeks. So you'll probably see some drill rigs out there poking a few holes in the road, giving us further clarification of what subsurface materials we're going to be dealing with in rehabilitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Trevor, is there anything you want to add back to this response? Hearing that, I will have a look around the room, seeing if there's any other points to be added before we close this conversation.
Madam Chair, here's Trevor has raised his hand again, so we can quickly allow him to see if there's any clarification he needs to provide.
Thank you. You're definitely faster than me. Thank you. Trevor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in looking at the work that's going to be going forward for the boreholes, this is tied directly to the road rehab project. Is that correct? It's not a initiative.
So through you,
thank you.
Answer your question. Yes, I suspect that the utility locates that are out there right now are most likely in relation to that borehole data work. That doesn't mean that there aren't other contractors or there aren't other potentials for other utility locates being pulled at the same time. But I do know that our geotechnical firm that we've engaged, or the city has engaged, has ordered those locates, and they're likely, given the timing, they have likely been completed in anticipation of having that borehole operation commence in the next couple of weeks. So I am slightly speculating, but I know that we do have locates out in that area at this time right now.
Thank you. I do see another hand up in the participants forum. I see Tim Hammond. The floor is yours.
And we'll just need to select unmute, and then he'll be able to speak.
Tim, if your audio or your microphone is not working, feel free to send a email, and we'll be able to address that offline or in another meeting as a correspondence item. I'll just wait a few extra seconds.
Yeah, there appears to be some difficulty there, so maybe we can move on, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for this update. Really appreciated to have all hands on deck with Mr. Follow, Mrs. Santucci, Mr. Simmons, Mr. Bolton. Thank you for your attendance once more. It's always a very important update for the Rural Advisory Committee. So thanks for being here. All right. So we will move on now to the new zoning bylaw project in rural area. I believe that this will be provided, an update provided by Laura Flaherty and James Barr. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of Rural Advisory Committee, and members of the public. I'm getting some warnings about my internet quality here, so I'm just going to turn off my video. Please jump in to let me know if there are any other connection issues during my presentation. So my name's Laura Flaherty. I'm the Project Manager in Planning Services. With me here this evening is my co-presenter, James Barr, the Manager of Development Approvals. Next slide, please. So we're obviously here to talk tonight about the city's new zoning bylaw project and specifically how the zoning bylaw applies in the rural area. So I'm leading the zoning bylaw project and James is one of the experts in planning services on the policies that apply in the rural area. Next slide, please. So recognizing that we have 10 to 15 minutes tonight to discuss an extremely large and complex project, we have scoped this presentation to cover some of the topics that are addressed in the new zoning bylaw that relates specifically to the rural area. So one of the major benefits of having our public events over Zoom means that they're recorded and available on the city's YouTube channel. So it's under the Kingston City Council YouTube. So for anyone who's interested in finding out information about the zoning bylaw project as a whole or any additional information, please check out the recorded presentations that are on the Kingston City Council YouTube channel. So I'll go through the contact info and the website details at the end of the presentation, but certainly start off with the recorded presentations in the video. Next slide, please. So before we get into the specifics, there are some fundamental elements that we should go through. So when we're looking at the policy context in Ontario, the Planning Act is the legislation that allows municipalities to pass zoning bylaws and contains direction about what items can actually be regulated through zoning. So under the Planning Act, we have the Provincial Policy Statement, or the PPS, and the PPS is a document that basically sets out the direction on matters of provincial interest related to land use planning in Ontario. So it sets the stage for regulating development. And as we've identified in the report on this evening's agenda, the PPS considers many policies in the rural areas to be matters of provincial interest, like the designation of prime agricultural areas and the need to focus rural growth in designated settlement areas. So zoning bylaws, when we pass them as a new citywide zoning bylaw, they're required to be consistent with the PPS. The official plan, or what we call the OP, is the municipality's vehicle to actually implement the PPS policies. So it establishes policies that direct land use changes in Kingston. So at a high level, the OP permits a range of uses that help to promote the long-term growth and viability of the rural area while protecting lands that are suitable for agricultural production from scattered development and uses that are not related to agriculture. So it focuses the appropriate rural growth in the identified hamlets to promote their vitality and regeneration. So when we're passing the new citywide zoning bylaw, it's required to conform with the official plan. That's our test that we're required to conform with. So zoning bylaws themselves are actually the most detailed tools that municipalities have to regulate individual properties. They regulate things like the use of land in buildings, the size, height, and location of buildings, the frontage, depth, and area of new parcels of land, parking or loading facilities, landscaping and amenity areas. They prohibit development in hazardous, contaminated, or environmentally sensitive areas, and they can establish minimum separation distances between things, say like a barn and a neighboring residential house. So before we move on from my inverted triangle slide, I'd like to quickly address the rural economic development strategy that you recently had a discussion about at Rural Advisory Committee. So from a planning perspective, the recommendations of that strategy have not yet been incorporated into the city's official plan. So the process would be that during the next official plan update, which is currently scheduled to begin in 2023, those recommendations would be considered through that process. And and then they would be brought into the new zoning bylaw. So all that being said, the current draft of the new zoning bylaw does not implement the recommendations of the rural economic development strategy that you've recently talked about, since it's required to conform with the official plan policies. Next slide, please. So in Kingston, we currently have 5 main zoning bylaws that apply across the municipality. The bylaws are really legacies of the former townships, and they predate amalgamation. So the existing zoning bylaws also predate the current OP, which was enacted in 2010. So many of the existing zoning bylaw provisions that are currently in effect do not actually reflect the current OP policies. So there's a disconnect between the vision for future growth and the protection of resources in certain areas and the provisions of the existing zoning bylaw. Within the rural area, the existing zoning bylaws that apply are the former townships of Kingston and Pittsburgh, and they cover the majority of the rural area. So when the new zoning bylaw project was originally scoped, I think back in 2013, it was scoped as a consolidation exercise with minor updates here and there where it was required to conform with the official plan. So that means in the rural area, in the first draft of the new zoning bylaw, which was actually released in 2016 before the project was put on hold, the 2 existing zoning bylaws from the 1970s were actually the basis for the majority of the zones in the rural area, with the exception of the prime agricultural zone, which was based off of the official plan mapping, not the existing zoning bylaws. Next slide, please. So when we talk about a new zoning bylaw, we have a vision to harmonize, simplify, and modernize the zoning framework across the municipality. So harmonizing the zoning provisions is more than just a consolidation. It means that while some of the elements of the zoning bylaw are continuing to be a consolidation, it also means that new and updated standards are proposed. Simplifying the zoning bylaw means that the language and maps have been modified to be as user-friendly as possible. So obviously a zoning bylaw is a legal document and some legal language can't be completely avoided, but wherever possible, we've amended the requirements to be more easily understood. Modernizing the zoning bylaw means that the terms have been updated, the uses better reflect current trends and have been written in a way that's intended to allow for innovation and new uses to thrive in the future. So when we look at the actual second draft of the zoning bylaw, we have a text-based document which lays out the legal requirements, and then we have corresponding mapping which identifies different areas of the city. Next slide, please. So the timeline that's been created recognizes that this project really is urgent. It's a project that's specifically identified in Council's strategic plan and in the Mayor's Task Force on Housing. So it's intended to help streamline the zoning review process by creating a document that's easier for everyone to use, and it is a key policy piece that will help to align the vision of the official plan with actual development on the ground. The second draft of the new zoning bylaw was released in August, and the associated official plan amendment was initiated in early September. So we had a statutory public meeting in October and a special meeting of council in November. We're currently working to review all of the public feedback and technical comments. The next major milestones on the project it's actually the final draft of the document at a statutory open house and public meeting in 2022, which would be followed by council's consideration of the final recommendations. Next slide, please. So I think it's really important to highlight that the new zoning bylaw, which is simply going to be called the Kingston zoning bylaw, has consciously left out the word city from the title to reflect that there are in fact urban areas in Kingston and there are rural areas in Kingston that will all be subject to the same unified zoning bylaw. So although it'll all be under one unified zoning bylaw, it recognizes the differences between urban and rural areas by creating zones that are either rural zones or urban zones, and by applying different standards to the two areas. So while many of the zone boundaries and standards in the rural area are consolidations of the existing rural zones, there are a number of important innovations that the new zoning bylaw brings to the rural areas. So I'll pass it over to James to talk a bit about the key changes that were included in the second draft. Next slide, please.
All right, thanks, Laura. Just to give you guys a heads up, Laura and I will be bouncing back and forth on a few of these slides. So we'll be passing this off to each other as we go. But today I'm going to start by talking about our prime agricultural area and some of the changes that we're making in the countryside. But I want to start off by saying that this zoning bylaw project does not change the boundaries of official plan designations or its permitted uses that are in place today. It will also not increase or decrease a property's severance abilities, which are currently governed by policies in both the official plan and the provincial policy statements. It's important to note that the existing zoning bylaws date back to the 1970s, and the current zones, which are predominating throughout the countryside, the A1 and A2 zones, do not align with the boundaries of or match really the permitted uses within the prime agricultural and rural designations. The prime agricultural zone, which is a new zone that we're creating, will align with the prime agricultural designation, and the general rural zone will align with the rural lands designation. And for each of these, the permitted uses will be updated to implement the intent of both of those specific designations. In addition, we are aligning, in addition to aligning the zoning with the designations, we are evaluating the existing provisions, including removing regulations that are no longer required. One of those regulations is a static setback for livestock barns that exists in the A1 and A2 zones of the former Kingston Township bylaw, and that is a provision that dates back to the 1970s. These static setbacks, which would have barns be set back a specific distance from neighboring homes and roads, are outdated and have been replaced by the provincially regulated minimum distance separation formula, which sets barns back from surrounding non-agricultural uses based on a set of criteria. These criteria that generate the calculation are based on the type of livestock that's proposed, the size of the barn, the size of the property, and how manure is handled on site. So it's more evaluative and less static. So it actually represents on the ground real life situations. We are also removing the specialized farm use from the zoning bylaw. And the specialized farm has always kind of confused me a little bit because a specialized farm means land on which the predominant economic activity consists of the raising of chickens, turkeys, or other fowl, or the raising of fur-bearing animals, the raising of pigs or goats, and the raising of cattle on feedlots, or the growing of mushrooms. In both the rural and prime agricultural designations, there is no determination or differentiation between the types of agriculture. They really allow the whole gamut of livestock uses, and the adverse impacts that are typically felt by a livestock barn are regulated through the minimum distance separation formula appropriately. Next slide, please. So these are unique provisions that the province introduced in the last decade. So on-farm diversified uses and agriculture-related uses were added to the provincial policy statement in 2014 and further explained in the 2016 provincial document that's titled Permitted Uses in Ontario Prime Agricultural Areas. Don't let that document fool you. These are uses that are not only permitted in prime agricultural areas, but anywhere that agriculture uses are also permitted, so in our rural areas as well. Agriculture-related uses are defined as those farm-related commercial and farm-related industrial uses that are directly related to farm operations in the area, support agriculture, benefit from being in close proximity to farm operations, and provide direct products and services to farm operations of the primary activity. Some examples of those are things like canning plants, a grain dryer, and a farm input supplier. On-farm diversified uses means those uses that are secondary to the principal agricultural use of the property and are limited in area. On-farm diversified uses include, but are not limited to, items like a home occupation, home industries or agritourism uses, and uses that provide value-added agricultural products. Some plain language examples of what those means could include a tasting room associated with a winery, a retail use or small cafe, a cheese factory, or an abattoir. The province really put these in the 2014 provincial policy statement because they were looking to provide direction and options for farmers in agriculture areas to have alternative forms of income and to make it clear to anybody in the rural area that these uses were actually encouraged throughout the countryside. Our current official plan mentions them as a use, but does not specify any parameters or direction on what they mean to the city. And there is no direction in the current zoning bylaw either. This means that anybody trying to establish these uses in the countryside would, at minimum, need to submit for a zoning bylaw amendment, which is about a 6 to 8 month process. As you can probably imagine as well, there are a multitude of other uses that could fall under these categories, and that there could be new ones in the future that we just haven't even contemplated today. New regulations are being established in our official plan through this process and our zoning bylaw to seek to provide parameters to facilitate these uses through a streamlined minor variance process in order to evaluate and facilitate these important uses in the rural area. Typically, a minor variance process can take around 3 to 4 months and is significantly less costly generally. Next slide, please. I'm going to pass this off to Laura.
Thanks, James. So it may be one of the most overlooked elements connected specifically to the rural area when we're talking about zoning bylaw provisions. But in the second draft, we proposed a shift in the protection of water bodies and riparian corridors from a map-based regulation to a text-based provision. So what does this actually mean in the rural area? Basically that the existing mapping, which is unverified, is not what we're relying on to protect water bodies. So instead, we have a definition of water body, and anything that meets that definition will be protected. So right now, within our unverified mapping, there might be minor drainage ditches or other features that have been picked up by the mapping that aren't actually water bodies. So the shift means that we'll actually be protecting the features where they exist on the ground and not over-regulating areas where the features don't actually exist. So we actually prepared a whole discussion paper about this topic at a public meeting in April. So if you're interested in more information about this, there is a recorded YouTube video also available on the city's YouTube channel, and I'm happy to provide any additional information about this. Next slide, please. So the second draft also includes new food truck provisions across the city and has introduced new permissions for food trucks as accessory uses in the prime ag and rural zones, and another effort to help to support agricultural uses in those zones. The home occupation provisions have also been amended. So now the new zoning bylaw allows a home occupation in an accessory building, which is currently prohibited by the existing zoning bylaws. And it's also removed a floor area cap that used to be 25%. And now it's basically the home occupation has to be less than the main residential house. There are currently restrictions also on the type of goods that can be sold, and they've been removed to allow for some greater flexibility and just a recognition of the types of home occupations that we're actually seeing in Kingston. Next slide, please. So before we go on to some of the further opportunities that we've discussed exploring before the final draft is issued, the last item that we've incorporated into the second draft through the power of parking discussion paper is the intent to really help to support a new car share system across the city. And I think at first glance, many people would say this is all urban based conversation, but the hope is that through this work with the power of parking and helping to support the establishment of a broader car share system, we're actually anticipating that that car share system will help to create new opportunities for rural residents to access car share vehicles. So it wouldn't be a program that's specifically focused in the urban area, but really expanded on a broader basis across the city to create new alternative modes of transportation to support residents in the rural area. So with that, I'll pass back to James to discuss some of the opportunities that have been identified through public feedback and discussions within the context of the existing OP policies. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Laura. I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities that we continue to investigate as we move from the second draft of the bylaw to the third and hopefully final draft. One area of feedback that we've gotten is around the opportunities for farm stands. Looking into the current bylaws, both the Kingston Township bylaw and Pittsburgh Township bylaws are a little disconnected in how they approach a basic farm stand. A farm produce outlet or a seasonal farm stand are both terms used loosely back and forth between the two bylaws. However, the Kingston Township bylaw does not define what those are, but the similar terms are defined within the Pittsburgh Township bylaw. In looking into harmonizing the provisions of the zoning bylaw, we are looking to embed a clear definition to enable farm stands as a permitted use where agriculture is happening. So farmers would have that ability to create those stands and stations on their property without any sort of Planning Act approvals. Next slide, please. In the second draft of the zoning bylaw, we have 3 zones for the hamlets: the hamlet residential zone, the hamlet commercial zone, and the hamlet institutional zone. When you look at the hamlet designation in the official plan, the policies allow for these three categories of uses broadly, and they tend to not have really any adverse impacts on one another, or they can just be mitigated on site. It's also important to note that hamlets prior to zoning typically evolve this way in a mixed use format. One of the opportunities we are currently exploring is creating a harmonized hamlet zone to consolidate these 3 and to create that kind of one governing zone with appropriate permissions and regulations to govern changes in hamlets moving forward. Next slide, please. And lastly, from me this evening, we're going to talk about recreational opportunities. The current zoning bylaws permit a variety of uses within the rural area, but they're mostly related to a residential use, a farming uses, as well as a host of kind of community uses on the countryside, like a church or community hall. But these properties are large and they can be diverse in the countryside. And one specific area we've had feedback on is the opportunity for recreational uses on persons' properties in the countryside where they don't currently live, but do own that property. So we are looking to develop appropriate zone provisions to permit recreational uses as a primary permitted use, akin to a single detached dwelling or farm uses on rural lots. These types of uses could include items like a hunt camp, a building to store recreational equipment in, such as a boat, or a small building to use when visiting and enjoying your non-developed rural property. We're still continuing to work on this through the third draft of the new zoning bylaw, and welcome any questions, comments, or feedback specifically on this section, as well as we look to develop first of its kind provisions for the city of Kingston. And with that, next slide, please, and I'll pass it back to Laura.
Thanks, James. So as far as opportunities are concerned within the new zoning bylaw project timeline, we've also identified an opportunity to review some of the rural industrial and rural commercial zones to ensure that they're as flexible as possible to support new business opportunities while also protecting agricultural uses and other rural uses in the area. So finally, I'm just flagging this really as a discussion point that there are opportunities if there are specific issues that you or other rural residents have come across in the past with the existing zoning bylaws. We welcome any feedback to see if there are any other ways that the zoning bylaw can be amended to support the vibrancy of the rural area. Next slide, please. There are many ways that members of the public can provide comments and access the second draft of the zoning bylaw and the proposed official plan amendment. So while the information report that's on the agenda tonight includes the majority of the information with links to all of the relevant documents and maps, the information can also be found on the project website as well as the Get Involved Kingston webpage. I'm also maintaining a project email list where updates are sent whenever we post new documents or whenever new events are scheduled. Written comments can be sent via email or mail, and we're also available to speak on the phone or meet virtually with any interested members of the public. So all of the contact information is here. Feel free to reach out if there are any questions about ways to participate. Next slide, please. So with that concludes our presentation this evening, and we're happy to answer any questions that members of the committee or the public have.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. I'd like to open the floor for questions from committee members. I'll just look over. I do believe that John was really interested in that briefing as well, so I do want to keep him in mind. I'll just...
Madam Chair. Yes, Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes, we can start with John, because I don't know, was it Derek or...
Sorry, that was me just trying to let you know that John wanted to speak, so...
Okay, perfect. Excellent, thank you. So John, all yours.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. And apologize, Miss Flaherty, and I'm sorry I missed the name of your colleague. I've lost the internet and I've lost my voice. I was really looking forward to this presentation, and I'm handicapped in how I can engage. I wonder, to start, have you considered the Farming and Food Production Act along with the Frontenac County Soil Survey?
Through you, Madam Chair. So I'll jump in here, and James, feel free to jump in as well. So within the context of the OP policies, they're written under the provincial policy statement. So the provincial policy statement basically identifies lands that are what the province considers to be prime agricultural lands. So the soil survey is not something that's considered at the zoning bylaw level, but it's something that's considered when we're actually creating the policies in the official plan. So in 2010, when the new OP was created, there was an extensive agricultural lands inventory that was completed in consultation with OMAFRA and the province, the MMAH, I should say, to ensure that the city was appropriately designating prime agricultural areas in accordance with the provincial policies. And certainly that work is something that is reviewed every time the OP update is completed. So that work actually fed into the recent update to the official plan, which I believe began in 2015 and was completed in 2017. So all of the updates to the appropriate lands were completed through that work. So the zoning bylaw is intended to implement the direction of the OP, which considers the soil quality in that assessment.
Perfect. Thanks, Laura. And I can jump in here. So I'm very familiar with the Farming and Food Production Act. And I just want to say that all of the work that we're doing here today will not impact normal farming practices within the countryside. We're actually looking to update and further our policies in order to allow greater agricultural uses in the area to support the agricultural community. And then in addition to that, the province has over the years instituted a number of practices, including the minimum distance separation formula, in order to try and lessen some of the pressures exerted on the agricultural community by encroaching non-agricultural uses. And that's specifically through the minimum distance separation, which seeks to locate new uses away from livestock barns that are existing, and to locate new livestock barns in areas where they do not impact on existing non-agricultural uses in the countryside. Further to what Laura said, when we again start looking at the official plan, if the province directs us to do a land area evaluation review for determining if prime agricultural boundaries are to be changed, both of these considerations of the Act as well as the soil survey will come into greater effect.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great to hear. Am I still on?
Yeah, John, all yours.
Okay, thanks. This phone sure is inconvenient. So what I'd really like to encourage then is that we actually try to put the cart before the horse. Because some years ago, I lived down Highway 2 and I'm surrounded by these old loyalist farmers. And I've got one neighbor who's on prime agricultural land and one who's not. And you stand there and look and you say, I don't see what the difference is. The soil types are the same, the topography is the same. And I inquired with Paige Agnew at the time as to how the prime agricultural designation was made. And yeah, the short answer is similar to what you've given tonight, is it's set by somebody in Guelph. I think there's an opportunity here for Kingston, especially because our Class 2 farmland has already been turned into subdivisions, to take a good hard look at our Class 3, Class 4, and Class 5 land and say, yeah, it's not prime, but Kingston never really had any prime land to begin with. We never had any Class 1 land. So we should take a look and see if we can leverage that loophole for municipalities to say, this is our prime agricultural land. You people in Guelph, sure, you have your input, but we here in Kingston have eyes on the ground, as it were. So it would be reassuring to see from a rural agricultural perspective that part of the zoning bylaw, not just taking the existing prime agricultural designations and putting them into the new zoning bylaw, but actually changing the prime agricultural area to align with what land is actually left, because some of it might have been designated prime agricultural and it's not anymore, or some of it has become the best we've got left. And yes, I agree absolutely with the minimum distance separation. I've gotten lucky in that regards with my goofball neighbor. The fact that I've got sheep in the barn means that he can't build whatever he's trying to build. But along with that, in our earlier emails, I inquired about this difference between agricultural use, agricultural related use, and on-farm diversified use. And as a lawyer, I love these definitions. I propose to you that it would actually be even more streamlined as part of the rural economic development strategy to just say all those three things are permitted in prime agricultural, or rural lands, so that there's not even a requirement for a minor variance. For example, if someone is in prime agricultural land and they're cash cropping, but they can't build a grain elevator because that's an agricultural related uses, we're compelling them to drive some kilometers down the road instead of just keeping tractors on dirt and getting to the elevator that way. So I don't see that there's an environmental interest, an economic interest to creating that sort of distinction when it makes a lot more sense to have those things on the ground.
Thank you, John. You're not seeing, but there were some nods around. James Barr, please, the floor is yours.
I'll lower my hand before I forget. There we go. Thank you, and through you, Chair. John, these are great comments, and these are the type of comments that I was hoping to get this evening when we brought up the rural provisions for this bylaw. I've worked in Eastern Ontario for almost a decade now in rural areas as well. And I can definitely confirm with you that we don't have prime agricultural lands like Southwestern Ontario has prime agricultural lands, but we do have good lands here, and they are prime to us because they have been continuously farmed. There are better soil qualities, and we want to consolidate those and make sure we still have an active agricultural operations within our own countryside, because it adds to the diversity and vitality of the city and the surrounding areas. If we do get to the point in the new official plan where the province directs us to do another evaluation of our prime agricultural lands, the LEAR process, and I apologize, I kind of mumbled the acronym evaluation earlier. LEAR stands for the Land Evaluation and Area Review, and it's 4 specific criteria that the province lays out that actually has a lot of municipal input into it to develop those determinants as to what is prime to the city. So that is a tool that we could potentially use down the road in order to evaluate and look at our land use balances within the countryside. I will, the grain elevator one is interesting. I've worked in municipalities where grain elevators still are not a permitted use as of right, even in zoning and heavy agricultural areas. And oftentimes those farmers have had to go through a zoning bylaw amendment to establish a rural industrial zone on their property over those specific uses. That's, I don't think, something that we were looking to predominate in our countryside area, because those uses are very much tied to an agricultural operation, an agricultural use, and in our opinion, the agricultural zone. But sometimes it's hard to develop broad regulations for these types of uses, which could be so extensive and could range from the grain elevator, which has greater height and width provisions, as well as trucking facilities, to something like a small canning operation. I see the minor variance process as a kind of quick evaluative format in order to be able to establish these things, rather than going through a more complex rezoning application, or in the case of our current official plan, even a redesignation to a rural industrial designation and a rezoning. And that process is even more restrictive, but it's kind of what our current official plan kind of gives direction to. So we're really trying to be mindful of being flexible in the rural area while establishing appropriate parameters to still protect and maintain our farming operations throughout the Kingston countryside. But if I could get one little plug in here, in the draft official plan document that we put out, I believe it's amending clause 36 and 38, is kind of our review parameter criteria that we're saying, okay, if you can meet all these criteria through a minor variance process, you can establish it this way. It's something we've been developing over time. It's an area I would really like to get specific feedback on because we haven't had any to date, and I would welcome it at this point. I kind of want to truth test this, to sound this, to really push this forward and make it something that will work for the city. So John, I hope you continue to feel better, and maybe you can take a look at that, and then you and I can sit down and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, James. I also like to move away from the grain elevator example. I think of something like Fruition Berry Farms or Waddell Apples, you know, where they're capturing all three things. They're doing the production of the fruit, they're doing some on-farm value through the various juicing things they've got there, and then they're also doing some agritourism. I just worry that even with the minor variance, that does just create a regulatory burden for farms, and farmers hate regulatory burdens. You know, that's even if it's just a day, that's a day away from probably pressing objectives. And really, like, I think the city is still covered through the MDS and through just the common law of nuisance, where if there's an actual problem of the land usage, if it's an agricultural use, it's not a normal farm practice, then there's very effective venues for people to get redress instead of needing to rely upon a planning bylaw. And that's really all I have to say. But I thank you very much for all your work, and thank you for making this presentation to the committee tonight.
Yes, thank you very much. I see, Alison, you have a question, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just, and thanks so much, James and Laura, for your excellent presentation. And it's encouraging to see that there's a lot of work that's been put into this to think about streamlining, especially since nothing has really been done for decades on streamlining this. So well done. And just a point of emphasis with respect to the language prime agricultural areas, that is such an old term. And I hope we never lose sight of the fact that these are classes of soil that were decided upon, again, decades ago. And we all know, because of improved technology in farming, that, you know, class 3, class 4 land is very, very productive. And we shouldn't get too hung up on old definitions. And I think there's even some momentum and some work being done by certain groups within OMAFRA to look at whether they want to call it reclassification of soils in the province, because everybody agrees they're outdated, especially when it comes to how land use issues. And I mean, technology such as tile drainage, better genetics in the crops that we grow, all basically can produce a lot of food for people. But my question is, and I just want to make sure I'm clear at the very beginning, Laura, is you were talking about the timing of things and the rural economic development strategy that was brought to this group. And I just want to understand and maybe have you review that, because this particular zoning bylaw project is to receive, the goal is its final affirmation through council in fall of 2022 next year. The rural economic development strategy isn't to be really, it's supposed to become part of the official plan, which means that isn't going to be fully revisited or entrenched until 2023. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, and Craig, I see that you're on the line here too, so feel free to jump in if I'm misstating things from your perspective. what I was referring to is, so the rural economic development strategy included recommendations that speak to amendments that need to happen to our official plan policies. So some of the recommendations speak to the OP update that's scheduled to begin in 2023. And it includes I'd say some pretty major shifts in some of the OP policies. So right now, we recognize that the zoning bylaw project is urgent. There are so many things that have come up over time that have said, like, this policy said in the OP really needs to be changed in order to get the zoning bylaw project right. Let's put the zoning bylaw project on hold. This policy set really needs to be changed to get the zoning bylaw right. Let's continue to put the zoning bylaw on hold. So it's been put on hold so many times that at this point in time, we've said we really need to get the new zoning bylaw done. It's really urgent and important to get it done. When the OP update brings forward some of the recommendations and considers those recommendations and implements revised policies in the OP, they would then be also brought into the new zoning bylaw as an amendment to the new zoning bylaw. So the form of the new zoning bylaw that we're hoping will get passed in 2022 at the completion of this specific project could then be amended in the future. Every time we amend the official plan policies, it's our intent to ensure that the zoning bylaw continues to be, to conform with the official plan policies and stay current. Right now, our zoning bylaws are 45 years old. And at this point in time, every time the OP changes, the zoning bylaw is just so far out of date that it's really hard to get it completely updated. So our hope is that in the future, well, our goal is that in the future, as the OP is updated, the zoning bylaw will also be updated. So any of the changes that are made to the OP policies to align with that rural economic development strategy through that 2023 review would then also be accompanied by amendments to the new zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. I just, so if through you, Madam Chair, I'm just concerned about the risk of redoing something. If, you know, and I can appreciate the urgency of getting this done. What is the level of risk of redoing something if something's identified when it's entrenched in the official plan, the rural economic development strategy, that there's going to be time lost or resources spent on something that we could have kind of brought together a little at the same time? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure if that was a question or more of a statement, but I can just follow up with that. So certainly any planning process that we go through as a municipality, there are appeal rights. So we're expecting that the passage of the new zoning bylaw will likely be appealed by at least one party. I can't imagine we're zoning 42,000 parcels of land across the city and it results in no appeals. I can hope, but there likely be appeals. The appeals are dealt with by the Ontario Land Tribunal, and that's a rather lengthy process to go through. So certainly anytime we need to do multiple amendments or approvals, there are multiple appeal processes. So that's one of the risks that we face with that. But from a timing perspective, holding off on the passage of the new zoning bylaw until the OP update is completed is also something that would take an extremely long period of time. So we think that in the interest of rural residents and urban residents across the city, getting the new zoning bylaw and the improvements that we've already incorporated into it in the interim period of time is certainly a benefit enough when we're talking about the cost benefit analysis.
Thank you. Very fruitful conversation. Are there any questions? Councillor Schroff, please.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And just certainly want to thank Laura and James for being here tonight. I mean, this is meat and potato night, really, isn't it? There's a lot here to digest. And I have heard it 3 or 4 times. And maybe I can say only understand it a little bit better. This is a lot here. Thank you, John, for if you're still here, for those great questions. And I really want to encourage you, John Wernham, from the committee here, to continue the dialogue, because just like I do believe we had success with the Waddell farm too, with Laura. Thank you, Laura, for engaging with them. To us on Rural Advisory, when we engage with the farming community, like Allison and Charlie and all that, it's really coming together of the minds that are impacted so much by this. And so I actually believe it needs to continue beyond this, but I don't know how that can happen. But I think that now that we are brought more aware as a committee, and Laura has made herself, along with James, completely available there. For me as a counselor, the message always is from the community to about flexibility, and you just talked about that's been on your mind throughout it. And I understand why we have cautions now. I've grown up a lot. I tell people as a counselor, I do understand why we want to do things well and right, but Laura, you mentioned once that you talk about they're embedded in these policies are pathways to opportunities. And I really hope that we as a committee kind of understand that and see it, and that we can identify where that's possible, especially to give success to our farming community. I love the idea of flexibility and farming options. And, there's such an excitement for me when we talk about the Rural Economic Strategic Plan and how it will blend with this, because it's going to allow people to, the small business in your homes, expanding the square footage and less specific. And I just want to celebrate that, because those were things that were holding me back early in my career, and so it was so when we can breathe life into that, we will breathe life into our community as a rural area. So those things matter. I wanted to say that. I know there are other engagements that you've had, and I hope that that's something, intentionally we can do over the next months yet, and give you, Laura and James, the input that you need. So please do reach out to all of us. And I believe there is Craig, where are we going to meet Ms. Snow tonight or not? Are we going to meet the director or what? I'm sorry, I don't know the position's called.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. We weren't formally on the agenda this evening, so we'll wait to formally introduce Tracy Snow, who's the new manager of rural and community development. Is their new title, but you talk about somebody who's going to be the person to drive the strategy forward. We're so fortunate to have Tracy join us. She knows the area. I think she knows some of you on the committee, and we're really excited. So we'll come back in the new year and do maybe a formal presentation and introduction of Tracy at that time.
Good. Yeah, well, I hope to through the chair to meet as well. And so thank you, Madam Chair, again for the time, but also for everyone here. There's a lot of things on my mind here, but I'll talk to Laura as well. I'll stay in touch with her. But really, there's so much here that it's just been great to crack this open and engage. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We'll certainly look forward to meeting Mrs. Snow in the near future. I do want to give the opportunity to members of the public to ask any questions if they have. So I'll just have a look here. If there's any hands, I see none.
I'll just, Madam Chair, take an opportunity to quickly remind people that if they do wish to provide comments, they should use the raise hand button that is at the bottom of their screen. We'll give them maybe an extra 10 seconds or so to see if there's any comments. We do have 2 members of the public still in attendance.
Sounds good. So we'll give a little bit of time.
I'm not seeing any hands from the public right now, so perhaps we can move on, but I believe one of the committee members wishes to add something. Mr. Wernham.
Yes, John, please take the lead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, this is small potatoes, but I do want to ask if any consideration can be given to changing the limits on building sizes. And I'm thinking of Salt of the Earth Farm down Highway 2. From what I understand right now, rural, urban, there's no difference. You can have a 10 by 10 or 108 square feet. although I've never done the math on how that comes out to anything other than 10 by 10 before you need a building permit. It'd be nice if we could see some consideration to like 10 by 20. I know some rural municipalities do that, and I think it would simplify things for our building department. They wouldn't have so many approvals coming through. Just say you're building a 10 by 10 on your 28-acre property, have at it. We don't need to give you an approval. This is not the same as someone putting a 10 by 10 into their 40 by 60 backyard. So just want to throw that out there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Laura, please.
Through you, Madam Chair. In the zoning bylaw, we certainly have provisions that speak to the size of accessory buildings. The reference that you're making about the 10 by 10 or 108 square feet, I believe, is the provision. It's under the Ontario Building Code. So it actually speaks to the size of building that you can build without requiring a building permit through the OBC. That's not something that we're able to change through the new zoning bylaw process. It is something that applies across the province through a completely separate building permit process. So the provisions of the zoning bylaw don't restrict accessory buildings to that size, but it simply says that once you get over that size, you're required to get a building permit. So unfortunately, through this process, we don't have any control over that threshold that's identified in the OBC.
That's too bad. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laura and James, for being with us and for your presentation tonight. We look forward to hearing more on how that turns out, and best of luck for this aggressive timeline that you have. All right, thank you. Now moving forward to the next item on the agenda, we are jumping into the motions. Derek, I have a little experience with motions, so certainly appreciate your guidance. I'm not sure if we're required to vote on this. I know it's been moved and seconded already.
Yes, Madam Chair, so I can speak to procedure for this. What would happen is the mover is first given an opportunity if they would like to add any comments or any explanation about the motion. From there, the seconder is given an opportunity to add any comments, and then it is opened up to debate by the committee. So any committee member can ask questions or make comments, and then once that process is wrapped up, it just goes to a vote. We do not need a mover and a seconder since it's already been done, but there is a vote required of the committee. So perhaps the starting point would be to allow Mr. Wernham a chance to maybe say a few words about the motion.
Excellent, thank you. John, would you like to add anything with respect to the motion that we have here on page 3 of the agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, the key information there is that I did a nice crunch through Statistics Canada about what our population density is compared to other counties. So hopefully that swings it, and hopefully council will be able to take this and run with it. I think we're still at the stage where we don't actually know who has the deciding power over these entities. Hopefully it gets to the right place.
Thank you. Allison, would you like to add anything with respect to the motion?
No, nothing to add, just grateful to see it come to fruition. I thank you, John. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Craig Desjardins, whoever else had a hand in it. Well put, and hopefully, yes, it will sway for support. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to open for conversation and debate with the committee. Councillor Usharoff.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to echo Alice, Ms. Shannon's comments there. Thank you, John, and everyone who's put this together. This has been going on for so long, and we did make some efforts even 4 years ago with MPP Randy Hillier, and things seem to have died there as well. So I'm really hopeful that this is one path forward, and that it's high time that we had results on that, and that we communicate that message. So I hope that we can escort this through certainly to City Hall, Kingston, but and beyond. And so now that we've got this together, I can't thank you guys enough for the wording and the work you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or arguments to be made from members of the committee? Seeing none.
Madam Chair, procedurally with motions as well, there is an opportunity for public comments as well. So perhaps we'll just remind members of the public if they have any comments they wish to add to this motion, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of Zoom, and we'll give a few seconds. I'm not seeing any hands, Madam Chair. So if the discussion is concluded, you can move it to a vote.
Excellent. So please, by show of hand, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
I see, I'll confirm for everybody that Mr. Wernham has raised his digital hand to confirm a yes vote. So
yeah. Thank you. All in favor. So the motion has passed. I believe this concludes the motion, Derek, and we can move forward to number 10, notices of motion. Please stop me if I'm going too fast. There are no notices of motion, no other business, no correspondence, and the date of the next meeting is to be determined. I believe we do not need to determine that tonight. It can be via email. Is that correct, Derek? Or do we want to schedule the meeting at this time?
It would be best, Jose. I'll reach out to members individually and we can determine the meeting schedule for 2020 because there is desire from one member to perhaps move away from Wednesday nights, but that's always difficult to do online in a forum like this. So we can correspond individually on that.
Perfect. And I believe last year we opted to have all of the meetings pre-scheduled so that we knew and we could put in our agenda immediately rather than having them discussed, you know, and setting the date one by one. So perhaps we can discuss an annual calendar and schedule via email as well. Councillor Oosterhoff?
That is my intention, Madam Chair.
Super. Okay. Yes, Councillor Oosterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Excellent advice on getting the meetings out there, and sooner the better, I guess. So, Madam Chair, will you be able to introduce Mr. Gunn to us and give us some, we can greet him and hear a little bit about him and welcome him to the board. I know you will, and I just want to remind us.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to start with a little introduction, but I think there was a little bit of complication getting on. Mr. Cameron Gunn, welcome to the Rural Advisory Committee.
Thank you, and my apologies for not getting on time. Some computer crashing issues, and I needed to keep my phone available as one of my roles is as a vocational teacher with the Limestone Board. So it's kind of been ringing nonstop for the last 3 months. Happy to be here, happy to learn the procedures and what's going on. I am relatively new to the Kingston area, and I live it's the Glen Burnie, Elginburg area. And I, as I said, I'm an occasional teacher with the board. I also have a small business of my own, doing carpentry, woodworking. And have 3 children at various schools in Kingston. So I've got a lot going on, a lot of interest in how the city's running and you know, how it's growing. So glad to be here, and thanks for your patience with my learning.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on board with us. To have fresh perspective, fresh eyes on some matters that we've been discussing. And I'm sure the 2022 work plan will be promising. That is what we plan to discuss in the next meeting. There will be a work plan conversation so that you'll get to have input and see what the committee will be discussing in the new year. So very timely to join the Rural Advisory Committee. Perhaps next meeting in the new year, the new chair or it could be a great idea to have everyone perform a brief introduction as a roundtable to make sure that every new member, well, Cameron, that you get to know us. So for now, I believe it's 8:04. So we are ready to call the meeting to closure and to adjourn. May I have someone to move the motion to adjourn? Someone, give me a hand. Councillor Ushrop, thank you. Can we have someone to second that? John Wernham. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, all in favor. Thank you very much and have a good night. See you in the new year.